Thank you for watching this video on the secret U.S. Air Force unit, the Ravens, that suffered one of the highest casualty rates of any unit during the Vietnam War. In this video, Ravens will tell their stories, but two questions have emerged from several of you concerning the Ravens. Those questions are, who did the Ravens work for, the chain of command if you will, and why did the Ravens develop a renegade reputation? I will very briefly address both questions, and young Raven Gene Hamner from late 1971 will explain the Raven mission as he explained it to an NBC News team inside Laos at that time. And remember, several of the stories that the Ravens recount, such as, for example, throwing the general's aide through a plate glass window and landing on a bear cage, an inebriated bear, can be found in Robin's book on the Ravens.
The main military factor in staving off the collapse of what is left of Laos is a massive bombing campaign. It involves Navy and Air Force jets, including B-52s, as well as the U.S.-supported Royal Lao Air Force. Most of the strikes in Laos are directed by American Air Force officers called FACs, or Forward Air Controllers. Accompanied by a Laotian observer, they cruise over enemy territory in a light plane, armed only with smoke rockets. Their task is to locate and mark the targets for the bombers. It's probably the most dangerous job in Laos. No one in Washington or Vientiane will say just how many bombs are being dropped or exactly where. But the facts say civilian targets are avoided.
We're reasonably sure that 100% of it's on military targets. We have a system of assurances. We carry a Laotian to talk to Laotians that don't speak English, and they verify our targets. There are certain places that are just obviously unfriendly, and any of the targets, trucks, boats, supplies that we find are military targets. And such targets where civilians may live, like villages or hooches somewhere, we stay strictly away from these.
Well, the North Vietnamese are pretty smart people. Knowing you're trying to avoid civilian targets, they concentrate their supply effort in a civilian-type area. What happens then?
Okay, well, of course, they've got that one system, and they use it all the time. They put supplies in villages, and we can't hit it. And, of course, the Laotians fly the Laotian airplanes, and there are occasions where if they deem the target is important enough, then Laotians, strictly Laotians with Americans, no American involvement whatsoever, hit targets that they consider to be of vital importance.
The Royal Lao Air Force is an American-created byproduct of the secret war. It's trained, equipped, and advised by Americans. And in a country where fighting spirit is hard to find, the Air Force has become an elite force. The pride of the Air Force are these fighter-bomber pilots. One pilot told me the whiskey helps him forget the 12.7s. He was referring to the 12.7 millimeter heavy machine guns, which are one of the communists' favorite and most deadly anti-aircraft weapons.
That thought always exists in the back of your mind. Now, you never know, of course, when somebody's going to pull in a 12.7. Whenever I go into a new area, I'm always careful to at least stay above the effective range of a 12.7. And then today it was particularly true that I had no idea what to expect because the friendlies had reported trucks moving in the area, and they could have been bringing in anything. So I started out in the area fairly high, But they don't have a tendency to shoot at facts so much unless they're reasonably sure that they can get them. Once they give away their position, then we call in too many airstrikes. So they generally stay away until they're sure they can either get a FAC or else they can get the strike aircraft.
The forward air controllers have become a special breed. Their uniform usually consists of blue jeans, camouflage survival vest, and a Colt revolver. They are mostly captains and lieutenants in their early 20s. They're proud of their work. This one, George Towsley, graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1969. Before that, he was an Eagle Scout. How long do you normally stay out on one of these missions?
Well, we can go for about 3 hours with the fuel we have, and we can stretch it to 3.5 mission. 4 hours about very most this airplane can go, and that leaves us no reserve, so 3.5.
Will you be relieved by somebody else then, or?
No, I'm taking off now, and I'll go to about 5 o'clock, and then I start going back home, and I'll be here for the day. We just fly in the daytime.
Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
Six weeks ago, George Towsley's luck ran out. He was killed over Laos. No one knows how many Americans have died there. That part of the secret war is still secret.
It was fantastic flying, and it was hazardous, but if you survived it, you knew that you could fly anything, anywhere, and that nobody was a better pilot than you were.
When I was in Vietnam fighting the war at Pleiku, Vietnam, in the O2 aircraft as a forward air controller, we became very dissatisfied with all the rules and regulations and constraints. We started hearing about this other war where you got to see the enemy and flew as much as you want, saw as much action as you want, and it was very rewarding. And so I volunteered for it, not knowing much more than that. In the briefing in the morning, they would either have some coordinates for you to look at or an actual strike coordinates they wanted you to hit. Maybe a ground team found a supply storage or an enemy site, and you were told to do that. Smoke to mark the target. If that ran out, then you had smoke grenades or something to mark it with, or just use a geographic coordinate on the ground.
I was hit on 111 different flights, and I was forced to land due to battle damage 10 times. I had one crash that was an engine failure. Of those 10, I made it back to friendly lines and or on a friendly airstrip 7 times, and 3 times Air America picked me up and brought me back in.
The interesting part about the rescue of downed pilots and all, it was primarily Air America that did that. And for one example, one of my best buddies over there was Jim Lewis, Sword in the book, a CIA ground pounder, battalion commander. And the day that they took back Pak Son, well, I landed on the dirt road outside of Pak Son to tour the town with Jim. And immediately after I landed, here comes an Air America helicopter, lands. Trouble with the Raven? That's how quick they were to respond. They're just great.
In the early 1960s, the Chinese began building a road from Yunnan province through Laos that by 1970 stretched almost to the Thai border. The road gravely concerned the Thai and the U.S. The Chinese established robust air defense artillery along its road and shot down several U.S. planes that ventured too close. The U.S. opposed the road, but by 1971, as Nixon was reaching out to China, political interference from Washington affected the warfighters' ability to prosecute the war.
In MR1, Military Region 1, the Chinese had built a road that came down out of Dien Bien Phu and was progressing down towards a town called Pak Bang on the Mekong River. As they progressed down, they were lining that with radar-controlled AAA. It was a place where you just didn't go. Fast movers would go up there. They'd get all of the radar indications on there. You know, they would leave. They had absolutely no intent to stay up there. Well, one day, C-123 got lost in the fog, and it got shot down. Air America called me and got me into a grid looking for this 123. They knew that it had gotten over Pak Bang. I spent a couple of days on that. The CIA operative Burr Smith at Zing Lom, he asked me, well, he didn't ask, he told me we needed you there at Zing Lom, that they were going to put some guys on a hard site they developed, and they were going to try to interdict this foot traffic that had been going from Pak Bay across the Mekong River down this valley and into northern Thailand. And they thought that they could get, these Laotian troops on this hard site and maybe stop that foot traffic. I destroyed some boats. They were fairly big boats, not the long boats that the Laotians typically used for their cargo. Anyway, we got those on the first day, and the second day they were going to bring those troops over to the hard site. So I did something. I mean, when you talk to people who didn't understand the war, didn't really understand anything about the intensity of what we were trying to do. We were doing things that when you told people that at times, that you would go out, leave an area, you open up the windows in the O1, and you could open both sides. You take a smoke grenade, pull the pin on it, hold your hand out the window, set the power on the plane, and then you come back into the area right on top of the trees. I mean, you're not 1,500 feet out of small arm, range or 4,500 for AAA. You're on top of the trees, and you're hoping that you would get people on the ground. They'd look up and they would give their position away by shooting at you. So we call it trolling for ground fire. And when you did hear that, you'd let the smoke grenade go, and then you had T-28s over the top. As soon as you saw the smoke coming up, you'd tell the T-28s hit the orange smoke or yellow or whatever color was. But, in the meantime, you're subjecting yourself to a very, threatening situation. I mean, if you go down, you're right into the trees, and of course they're looking at you, but we did it. But anyway, I did that, and I didn't get any ground fire. I didn't hear anything, and I flew around. I put in a couple airstrikes here and there so that if someone thought they had been seen, maybe they would then shoot. I go back to Zing Lom, and I told Burr Smith, I said, I'm not getting any ground fire. I said, I don't think the threat's there. So anyway, they went back and they put these guys on the ground, and mortars and all kinds of things went off. It turns out these were Chinese. These weren't Pathet Lao that I was used to. Pak Bang, was a hotbed of the Chinese, and they were the ones moving all the material into northern Thailand. Then it was just a very classified thing. I mean, this was a secret war in a secret war. So anyway, I worked that a couple of times, and the other two guys who had been doing it, Chuck Russell and Craig Bradford, Chuck had gotten killed on December 3rd, and Craig Bradford escorted his body back to the U.S. So that left me there alone, and that's why I got pulled into this thing. Chuck and Craig Bradford were working with Burr Smith. I think they knew everything that they needed to know. Got the embassy on point. I got to stay away from all things Chinese. And of course, you don't know what's Chinese until after the fact. So I don't know how you could avoid that.
Then on September 24th, I think it was Raven 01, Drobow, came to visit us in Savannah Cat, and he said, we don't want Raven 32. I was with Brian Wages at the time, and Tim Danforth was there for part of the time. He said, we want you to avoid any activity on Route 23 or 917 for diplomatic reasons. I'll never forget, he said, for diplomatic reasons. Well, that didn't sit very well, telling you not to fight. So I continued to do my thing, and after 3 days of that, they sent a message to Brian, I guess, and said, Raven 32 is not following instructions. He's not to engage the enemy or do anything to fight the enemy for diplomatic reasons again. So I continued to do my thing, and they notified him that I was going to one more incident and I was going to get sent home. So I didn't know what diplomatic reasons were, but I thought, well, I don't want to get sent home. So I continued to fly missions, but I didn't engage the enemy.
They were trying to retake this site. And on this hill, a couple of 3 miles away, there was a bivouacked unit, NVA unit. And there was a stream running along the side of it. And then out in the lower area was a rice paddy. And so Vang Pao said, they're in there. And so I managed to get 2 F-4s who were striking over near the site they were trying to take. And they both had 2 cans of napalm left. And that's all they had. So I described the target and did everything I could to get them on it. And so Lead said, yeah, I think I got it. So I'm in. So he came in on like a glide bomb sort of trajectory. And he released his 2 cans of napalm. They tumbled through the air, sailed right over the top of this mountain and into the next valley. And I said, you're long, it's over the top. And so number 2 said, I've got it, Butterfly. And so he let his go, and they went right in there, all under the trees. It just, after they retook the site, I had been pestered by the Air Force in Udorn to give BDA, bomb damage assessment, back to them, because he said the guys go up there, they make toothpicks, and they come back, they don't know what, they don't get any feedback, because you guys are out there living in the jungle by yourself. So I said, so I went to Vang Pao and I told him, I said, this story. Now, Vang Pao spoke better French than he did English. And so I'm not sure he got what I was saying. So the next time we went up there, he said, right. So I grabbed my M16 out of the airplane, and so off we went through the jungle. And we walked for about, I don't know, half an hour. And so we came to this place where I had put these aircraft on it. I forgot to say, after the F-4s finished, because that's all they had, away they went, and I was able to get a couple of A1Es. And they had 20 millimeter Mike, the high explosive 20 millimeter stuff. And so that's all they had left. So I said, just put it all into that hillside. So they did. And then Vang Pao started jumping up and down in the back of the airplane, and he goes, they run. I looked, and they jumped across this stream, whoever was left, and they were running across this rice paddy. So I told the A1Es where they were. And I said, in the rice paddy, just at the foot of the mountain. And so they rolled in, and one said, well, I don't see it. Oh, there they are. And they just sparkled all over that rice paddy until they were out of 20 millimeter. Then off they went. So back to my original story, Vang Pao's dragging me through the jungle. And he takes me to this place. And yes, they had a nice little bivouac there. In fact, they'd started growing vegetables, and they had dug the foxholes in this sort of J shape to try to keep out of the debris from an airstrike. They had built a little jetty out into the stream, but all covered by the trees and everything, so it couldn't be seen by the air. And so we crossed the stream and went out into the rice paddy. They'd recovered their dead. There was nobody around. One of these mounds at the foxhole had the remains of a canister of napalm wrapped around it. That must have been unpleasant. But anyway, we got out into the rice paddy, and I picked up a shoe that had been made with car tread as a sole, and looked like you'd taken a blowtorch and burned the side out of it. And I found a smock that said "Made in Hanoi" in French in the back of it, all out in the rice paddy. But they had recovered everybody, so there was nothing to see. So, but Vang Pao's point was, see, we're not doing nothing. You know, these strikes are accomplishing something, and he wanted me to report that back.
That was the first time I had man against gun, eyeball to eyeball. One time in a T-28, I was used to ground fire from underneath and watching the ground. But Joe Potter, who was in charge of Laotian Air Force guys at 20 Alternate, gave me a call. He says, one of my guys is down, and he gave me the location. And he had jumped into a T-28 to get to the rescue site, but his guns were not loaded. So I came into the valley where this guy got shot down, and I got surprised by 14.5 fired over the top of me. And I was lucky I was all armed up, and I was ready to go. And I was used to a 14.5. It was rapid fire, and they have a burst about 4 or 5 seconds. It's several hundred rounds, but then they would pause before they could hit another magazine or before they could fire again. So I took advantage of the pause, and by his tracers gave me his location perfectly. And my first burst of a 50 cal hit boxes of ammo that were right next to the gun position. And that fireball was the last we heard of that gun. The fireball plumed up, and I kept going straight into the target and fired some more rounds into where the gun was, and then pulled off, and that was the end of the gun. The gun went rolling down the hill, and the poor Laotian pilot was at the bottom of the valley, and it was lucky I had enough gas. I had already flown 2 hours, so that was all I could do, and I had just enough gas to get back home. Joe Potter took over the helicopter rescue, and Jolly Green Giants took another hour before they got there. But without the gun there, they were able to go down and rescue the pilot.
The Ravens developed a renegade or ill-disciplined reputation among senior Air Force leaders. The reason was that the Ravens were fighting in a new type of warfare that these senior leaders simply didn't understand and had no control over. The Ravens didn't work for these senior leaders, clouding the Air Force understanding even further. The Raven reputation developed after U.S. Air Force General Pettit visited the Ravens and later stated, "The Raven facts at Longchang are nothing but a ragged band of Mexican bandits." Catching wind of the description motivated the Ravens to pose for such pictures. The Vietnam War senior Air Force leadership possessed the World War II bomber mentality. You receive orders to bomb a distant target, you plan your ingress, your egress, you execute, and hopefully come home. But the war in Laos was an entirely different kind of conflict that didn't present such a clean, linear execution. In this war, young lieutenants and captains were sent out on their own with no guidance other than to seek and destroy the enemy while simultaneously talking to fighters, the airborne communication post, their backseater or CIA officers on the ground, or both, making instant, complex targeting, life and death decisions in a short-fused, high-intensity environment every day. All the while they were being shot at. So Ravens were the rules of engagement. This new, harsh type of warfare presented complexities that no one really understood, and the Ravens operated under a tangled chain of command. A hybrid Air Force command, the 713th, was in charge of U.S. Air Force operations in the area, but the U.S. ambassador commanded all U.S. forces in Laos. Ravens were officially placed under the command of Detachment 156, Operations Wing at Udon Thani Royal Thai Air Force Base, where their records were kept. But Ravens were loaned to the Air Force Air Attaché in far-off Vientiane, who might as well have been in Manila for their understanding of the Raven mission. But upcountry, where the Ravens were stationed, the CIA, or Vang Pao, and the Ravens themselves drove operations based on the realities of daily combat. They were literally making up new tactics as they went.
And I was also getting familiarized with the local chain of command, as it were, who is in charge. And Pak Se was basically the senior CIA officer down there. Ken Ferguson was the station chief, and he ran all the staff meetings and that kind of stuff. And then we worked directly with the CIA case officers for the different Lao units, that kind of thing. We also worked with the Air America guys, and we got to meet all of those for a couple of days while I was going around with them.
In theory, we worked for the attaché's office, but it was very obvious. You're out there in the field, you're living in a valley with about 20 CIA guys, something like that, and they're the customer, and in fact, that's what they call themselves, the customer.
Technically, we were in country as forest rangers. I'm not sure what our job was to be other than going out and marking trees and cutting them down with, 500-pound bombs.
And we were flying 180 hours a month. I get this call from this colonel. He said, "This is Colonel so-and-so from 713th Air Force," which was our higher headquarters for Udon there. They didn't affect us. We didn't work for them. We worked for the embassy directly. And we weren't in the Air Force, which is one of the reasons that we had trouble getting along with some of the Air Force colonels, is they lost control of us when we crossed the fence. We worked for the ambassador, and we worked directly for the ambassador. The ambassador was the clearance authority for Western Laos, for all the occupied, the friendly occupied Laos. So we were the clearance authorities for the targets there. This, ruffled a few feathers with the 713th, for instance. I get this call from this colonel, and he calls up and he says, is Mr. Russell there? Mr. Russell was the AOC commander. He's a major that was in charge of the Air Operations Center there. And I said, well, no, sir, he's off station up in Vientiane today. Can I help you? And he says, well, who is this? And I said, well, this is Mr. Hatch. And he says, oh, good. You're the one I need to talk to anyway. And he says, it's come to our attention that you're going to exceed 330 hours for the quarter. He says, as you know, the Air Force has waived 125 hours for the month, but they've never waived 330 for the quarter. And I said, well, sir, we're not in the Air Force. We don't have those regulations. And he said, oh, come on. He said, you guys are flying too much. He said, what are we going to say if one of you gets shot down? He said, you're way over the hours. And I said, sir, again, we're not in the Air Force. We don't have those hour restrictions. He said, well, be that as it may, he said, you're going to have to sit down to the end of the month. Well, in the first place, this guy shouldn't have even been able to get a hold of me. He had to go through several different switches to get a phone call to Pak Se. And in the second thing, he had no control over me, and he couldn't tell me to sit down. And I said, well, Colonel, we've got a two-front war going on down here, and the customer wants continued air coverage over both fronts. I said, can you send me another O-1 and 2 more Ravens? And he said, no, I can't do that. And I said, well, if that's the case, I have to go fly my second sortie of the day, Colonel. I'll have to say goodbye. And he says, what are we going to say if you guys get shot down? Now, keep in mind, this is at the end of November. And I said, well, Colonel, say they were good old boys. And hung up the phone and went out and flew my second sortie of the day. And much to that colonel's chagrin, I'm sure, this was just before December started, which is when we had 3 out of the 4 Ravens shot down at Saravan.
Jack Shaw and Lou Hatch were in the same aircraft, Hatch was giving Shaw his checkout ride. This shoot-down story is in the first Ravens video. Being shot down, Lou made the landing from the back seat and passed Shaw on the ride. Shaw objected, saying he hadn't made the landing. Hatch told him that if he didn't pass him on the ride, Hatch would have to ride with him again the next day, and quote, "I will never fly with you again," unquote. Said in jest, of course, but they never flew together again. Both are lifelong friends, and interestingly, both became commercial pilots for the same company, and during their orientation, the company briefer said the pilots should get to know each other, as they may fly together again in the future. Both men chuckled.
The Ravens had everybody was first name, and including the radio operator, the intel guy, but they were military guys and they were pretty good. But the cook, Espy, he was really loose. He became one of the boys, and he had been around quite a few months. And he called us all by a first name and joked with us and everything. So he got a little bit too familiar. Then I got up from my dawn patrol. I was always the first Raven up anyway. And I would make coffee, but Espy wasn't there to fix breakfast. So I went to his room and I said, "Espy," I said, I need some breakfast. He said, "Mike, fix it yourself." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, baby." I said, "You get your ass out of bed." I said, "You are going to learn why I need breakfast." And I grabbed him by the nape of the neck and I said, "Put your boots on." He said, "Why?" I said, "Put your boots on. That's an order." So I weighed 220 pounds. He probably weighed 130. So I shook him like a rag doll, and he realized I was going to beat him into submission. So he got his boots on, and it was already late. And I said, "We don't have time for breakfast now, pal. So we got to go fly." I said, "The sun's coming up." So I took him out to the airplane, and I got the crew chief to help me push him into the back cockpit. And I got in and closed it. He tried to get out, and I closed the canopy on him. And we threw him a headset so he could listen in. And so I took him for dawn patrol, and I would look at my rearview mirror and I couldn't see him. He was hiding down in the cockpit as far as he could go. So I took him up and I pulled G's on takeoff, and I just jerked that airplane. Every time he'd stick his head up, I'd bounce his head off the side of the canopy. And so we went up. We had a good mission, and I got some fighters and put in some trucks that we caught up in the Van Valley, and they were shooting back at us. And he says, "Mike, we can get killed." And I said, "Yes, we can." I said, "You're going to die with me." And I said, "But next time we're going to have breakfast." Anyway, I took Espy for the full 3-hour mission. And every time he stuck his head out, I'd bang him around. And I did some acrobatics to make sure. And to his credit, he did not throw up. Usually folks that get pushed around puke, but he did not throw up, so to his credit. So we come back, and he was all the color was drained out of his face, and he was thoroughly terrorized, and he was shaking like a leaf. We got out of the airplane, and he came over to the wing of the airplane, and he banged on the wing of the airplane. He said, "Mike, This is the airplane. You are the pilot. You fly the airplane. I am SB, the cook, and I cook. And I said, SB, you got it. Now you understand why I need breakfast. so, so the next morning for dawn patrol, I went in the kitchen and the coffee was on and the bacon was cooked. And he said, "How do you want your eggs, sir?"
So these guys are crossing the river, and I'm in the T-28 Tango, as we call it. And I'm sure they looked up at me. They were head lads. I mean, they had to know they were in trouble. The T-28 Raven buzzing overhead. They're crossing this river, and they can't run in water up your neck. Sure, they were terrified. So I rolled in on them with the T-28, 90 degrees to them. They were crossing the river going this way, and I rolled in going this way. And I thought, if I can't kill them, I'm going to scare the bejabbers out of them. So I fired my 1050s. I started firing, and I could see the rounds hitting the water, splashing. And right before it got to them, I stopped firing, I pulled up, and flew over them. Well, two guns don't jam. You might have a gun jam, but not two. And in my case, I always personally loaded or inspected the way the 50 cals were loaded because I didn't ever want my guns to jam. So I flew overhead, and I'm sure they thought, oh, we're lucky. I turned around, and coming from the opposite direction, I started firing. And again, I stopped right before the bullets got 2 meters from them. Stopped firing at him because I didn't want to lose my Raven status. So I couldn't kill him, but I sure scared the hell out of him when I did that. I pulled up, I came around right on the deck, right on the water, flew over them, rocked my wings a couple times, and left. And to this day, I'm sure they tell that story to their grandchildren or something because they know two guns don't jam twice. It was my decision not to kill him because it would have been the wrong thing to do.
There was this two-star, and his name was Pettit, because he comes up, he's going to spend the night with us, and he's going to suck up, we were warned about this, he was going to suck up to General Vang Pao to get a 19th century Hmong musket for, I guess, his gun collection or something. He gets out of the airplane, he had a second lieutenant aide, which points out to you that he's not important, and he looks at me and the other Raven and says, "You people obviously have no discipline. You look like Mexican bandits." This is the bright shoes, bright mind mentality. Let's say he did not have a pleasant time. It's winter, okay, so at night it got down into the 40s, and there was no heat. We all had two blankets. We took one blanket off his bed, and then when Joe, the guy from Hurlburt, came in, and the general was already in bed, he opened up the shutters, so he froze his ass off. And this was Hmong New Year, and so everybody was kind of taking it easy for a day or so. CIA had the bar. Their house was next door to ours, upslope, and I'm sure you've heard of the Bear Cage Bar. So I was in there at the bar. The lieutenant aide walks in, and he was terribly obnoxious. He really thought he was important. And he really pissed off. I don't remember if there were CIA or Air America guys, but in this bar built on top of the barricade was this magnificent plate glass window overlooking the valley. These guys, just as they were about to throw this lieutenant, through the window, the general walks in time to see his lieutenant go flying through this plate glass window, all the glass shattering, and of course the lieutenant screams, and he lands on top of the barricade. Okay. His leg dangles down through the bars, and Floyd, the drinking bear, was absolutely drunk, shit-faced. He hugs the guy's leg. Then the guy really screams, and the general thought, ooh,